Sixth grade, welcome to another chapter in history. Today we're moving on to chapter 4. We're going to actually start talking about the first civilization. So we'll be talking about Mesopotamia. And I'm just going to go to the chapter opener. That starts on page 73 for you. Those of you who are following along in your textbook. See if I can do that again. Where we're going to start to work our way through those things. You have the fill in the blank sheet sitting next to you. As we get rolling. It says, have you ever watched a large subdivision of homes being built? Did you notice solid structures beginning to appear on what was once only flat land? The Assyrian king Ashur-nasirpal II built such a project during his reign. From 883 to 859 BC, he took the small town of Nimrud and made it his capital. When he was finished, the city occupied about 900 acres. Around it, he built a wall 120 feet thick, 42 feet high, and 5 miles long. The gates were guarded by 2 huge human-headed winged bulls. Part of these gates can be seen in the New York Metropolitan Museum today. When he finished the city, the king held a festival attended by about 70,000 people. Here, he said, "We're the happy people of all lands together." So we're going to talk about this guy later on, guys, but you just need to appreciate the power of these walls. We talk about Jericho and its thick walls, guys. I don't know if you ever thought of them being that thick. Obviously, you can't knock those things down, and it was great protection to get into that stuff. Okay, we always look at this, guys. This is called the Fertile Crescent today. Up here is Mesopotamia. We're going to start by talking down here, the greatest and best land. Today, guys, this would be Kuwait. This would be mainly Iraq and Iran. Okay, over here, Israel, Syria, Lebanon. Things from the Bible are over here. Okay, for the first time, guys, you have a timeline that has 2. Here are events that are happening in the world on the bottom. We've talked and will talk about these in the future. Here are the events that are going to be covered in this chapter. Okay, so they have some of those things there. So Assyria gains control here, and then what we just read happens right out here where he builds his city. Okay, so we'll talk about some of these guys. So for the first time, and from now on, you're going to have this double timeline. What's happening in the chapter compared to what's happening at the same time around the world. All right, let's get into lesson 1. Lesson 1, we're after the Sumerians today. The essential question is going to be a common theme, guys. Almost every first lesson in the chapters for the next 10 to 12 chapters will be, how does geography influence the way people live? So I need to physically understand the land so that I can then understand why the people did what they did there. It matters because the Sumerians made important advances in areas such as farming and writing that laid the foundation for all future civilizations. We'll talk about how Mesopotamia is pretty much the first civilization ever, guys, and that is biblically accurate. If I would go back to time and place here, we believe the Garden of Eden is somewhere in here. Okay, the Garden of Eden has 4 rivers mentioned. These are 2 of them still today. It said it was built between the Tigris and the Euphrates, and then I forget the other 2. Pishon was one and some other one. But we don't know where those rivers are, guys, but it makes us believe that the Garden of Eden is right here. So it makes sense that Adam and Eve started here, and so the first civilization should start here as well. Let's get into it. Civilizations, boom, you're in your notes already. First developed about 3000 BC in the river valleys of Mesopotamia. Egypt, India, and China. If you remember last chapter, guys, this is how we ended it. There were 4 great river civilizations, Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and China. We're taking the first one. I love the dates. Yes, I believe the first civilization started around 3000 BC. Throughout history, we need to have water for drinking and growing crops. That's why we settled by a river. That influenced where people settled. Although there were differences among early civilizations, they were alike in many ways. As these early civilizations developed, people formed social classes. The social class people belonged to partly depended on their occupation. They did specialized tasks of work. Using improved technology, they made more and better goods. They set up governments to pass laws, defend their land, and carry out large building projects. The people of these civilizations also developed systems of values and beliefs that gave meaning to their lives. Guys, this is just one big review for how we ended chapter 3. The 4 river civilizations, and then remember, what did it take to be a civilization? You had to have social classes, trade, government, religion, writing, and so it's just a review. Let's talk about the civilization we're going to talk about then. Mesopotamia, the earliest known civilization, developed in what is now today southern Iraq. Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers in Greek. So guys, today in history, we call it Mesopotamia because the Greeks, when they conquered it hundreds of years later, called it that. What it was called before that, we will talk about, but it's one of the reasons we call it Sumerians here, but today it's called Mesopotamia because of its Greek word for it. The civilization began on the plains between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. These rivers run about parallel to each other and flow more than 1,000 miles. They run southeast from the mountains of southeastern Asia to the Persian Gulf. So I'm going to click here quick. So this is Mesopotamia. They start up here. They get their source from these mountains up here when snow melts and flows down here until they hit the Persian Gulf. In my lifetime, guys, in the 90s, we fought what was called the Persian Gulf War. Iraq came down and invaded Kuwait, led by Saddam Hussein. We came up the Persian Gulf and we fought it back. Okay. Then after 9/11, we had the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Afghanistan's over here, Iraq's over here, so we went back to war with Iraq a second time and eventually killed his leader, Saddam Hussein. Okay, so that's just how this river flows. Mesopotamia itself was located in the eastern part of what is called the larger Fertile Crescent. So crescent is shaped like a C. That's what it's part of. So this whole thing is the Fertile Crescent. This is Mesopotamia here. This curving strip of good farmland extends from the Mediterranean Sea to the Persian Gulf. The Fertile Crescent includes parts of modern-day countries of Turkey, this is Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan. Okay, so this is biblical, guys. This is God's people here. Galilee, Samaria, Judea down here. Oops, sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I don't know what I'm doing.
Most ancient cities.
Okay, sorry for hitting the play button. Okay, so you have that there. You also filled in your blank of Fertile Crescent. For thousands of years, clues to Mesopotamia's history lay buried among its ruins and piles of rubble. In the 1800s, archaeologists began to dig up many buildings and artifacts. These finds finally revealed much about the early Mesopotamian. Historians believe that the people first settled in Mesopotamia about 7000 BC. The first settlers were hunters and herders. By about 4000 BC, some of these groups had moved to the plains of the Tigris and Euphrates Valley. They built farming villages along these two rivers. Okay, so guys, I think this date stretches a little too far, so this is what we always talk about. In last chapter, we talked about the agricultural revolution. So they believe that we actually had a civilization in 3000 BC, but what your history book is saying is it took thousands of years to get enough people. They had to start out as hunter-gatherers. They slowly learned how to do farming. That probably took 3,000 to 4,000 years until we get here. I don't believe that for a second. I think within 1,000 years from the creation, we have enough people to form this civilization. So I don't really like this paragraph. I think it's just a tad long on the dates, but makes some sense. I just think historians make it take too long because of their evolutionary beliefs. Early Mesopotamian farmers used water from the Tigris and Euphrates River to water their fields. However, the farmers could not always rely on the rivers for their needs. Little or no rain fell in the summer. As a result, the rivers were often low. Farmers did not have enough water to plant crops in the fall. Okay, so we're down here. Farmers did not have enough water to plant crops in the fall because of the very little rain that came during the summer. So what do we have to do? During the spring harvest, guys, their seasons are different than ours. Rains and melting snow from the northern mountains caused the rivers to overflow their banks. This flooded the plains. Sometimes unexpected and violent floods swept away crops, homes, and livestock. I'll read the next paragraph, we'll talk about it. Yet farmers in Mesopotamia knew that the floods were also helpful. Flooded rivers were filled with silt. Number 9, or small particles of soil. When the floods ended, silt was left on the banks and the plains. The silt proved to be very good soil for farming. So I read this paragraph and I'm like, why would you live so close to a river that it could flood and wash your food and crops and home away? Well, you had to live there, guys. That was the only place where farming was good enough. So you're playing a fine line there in ancient times. I want to be close to this river because it gives me the good soil and the water I need. Too far away, not enough water, crops dry up. Too close, I might get flooded. That is the risk I have to take. And so we're going to see everything they're going to do to try to say, we want to stay close, but how can we live through this? Over time, people in Mesopotamia learned to build dams to control the seasonal floods. They dug canals that would let water flow from a water source to their fields. This method of watering crops is called irrigation. Irrigation let these farmers grow surpluses, which is an extra amount of food. Farmers stored the surpluses for later use, okay? So finally, guys, we got the silt, and then irrigation let these farmers grow surpluses, which means we have extra food. As soon as we have extra food, we can have how we ended last chapter. We can have other people specialize and do other jobs, and we'll talk about that again this chapter. So guys, what they did is they built canals. Those are like small man-made rivers off the side of it. So what we would do is you picture a river flowing, and then you build a wall along the river and build a river off it to your land. Okay, so in the spring we got too much water. We open the gates, the water fills my canal to my field. So it's one way to get rid of the extra water so it doesn't flood, and then stores it next to my field. Then the summer hits and I close the gate and I store the water that I have in my little canal, and as the river dries up, we don't force more water down the canals. And so we're trying to, 1, stop a flood, and 2, get water to our crops. When food was plentiful, not all the people needed to farm. Some people became artisans. What's an artisan? It's a skilled worker, somebody who can make something. They specialized in weaving cloth, making pottery, making tools, making weapon. So you got the word tools in here for number 11, guys, as we work our way through that. As artisans made more goods, people's lives changed. People began to live together in places that favored trade. Small farming villages grew into cities. By 3000 BC, several cities developed in Sumer, a region in southern Mesopotamia. If you remember from your map, guys, at the beginning, Sumer is down here. So we're starting to get these bigger cities. We say, hey, I can do all the farming. You do pottery, you do tools, you do weapons, you do cloth, you do jewelry, you do all those things. And now we got to trade that with ourselves so we all live close so we can trade. So that's going to boom that. So number 12, several cities developed in Sumer, a region in southern Mesopotamia. Sumer's people were known as Sumerians. They built the first cities in southwest Asia. The cities include Uruk, and Eridu. These cities became the centers of civilization and controlled the lower parts of the Tigris and Euphrates River. Okay, so they built the first cities in the direction, guys, southwest Asia. If you are really good at your Bible, you'll know that this is where Abraham came from. Abraham came out of and the Chaldeans, and in the next few lessons we'll talk about the Chaldeans, guys. Okay, so biblical city here, kind of interesting. Sumer cities were surrounded by mud flats and patches of scorching desert. The harsh landscape made it hard to travel by land and communicate with other groups. This meant that each city was largely cut off from its neighbors. As a result, Sumerian cities became independent. The people of each city raised their own crops, made their own goods. As the cities grew, they gained political and economic control over the lands around them. By doing this, they formed what we today call city-states. Each city-state had its own government and was not part of any larger governing state. The population of the city-states ranged from about 5 to 20,000 people. Okay, so number 14 is up here, guys. It was a harsh landscape, and so because it was harsh, I didn't want to travel from one city to the next because I might run out of food on the way because of the desert that it was going through. So where my city was, we had plenty of water, and we just kind of did our own thing. So we called it our own city-state because it literally had its own everything. It had its own government, is what you're filling in, but we would farm in the area, we'd trade in the area, and that was pretty much it. Now we're going to learn in a second that there were changes to that. I would travel if I had to, but for the most part, guys, we call them city-states because a city was its own state. Just like Wisconsin has its own rules and its own laws that is unique to Wisconsin, and so does every other state in America, it's down to the size of a city. So it's the size of a city that runs itself, and we give it that term. Historians think that each Sumerian city-state was protected by a large wall. How do we know that? Ruins and artifacts have been found by archaeologists that support this theory. So once again, guys, they say they think because it's not proven, but we have these big blocks, we assume they came from walls. Because stone and wood were in short supply, the Sumerians used mud from the river as their main building material. They mixed mud with crushed reeds, like the Egyptians, formed bricks, and left them in the sun to dry. The gates of the wall stayed open during the day, but were closed at night for protection. The ruler's palace, a large temple, and other public buildings were located in the center of the city. Okay, so you're over here, you have a large city wall, guys. In other words, that's going to make us think all kinds of things. One, you needed protection. Two, you had this city gate where you went out of the city to farm at night in your little farming villages, but if the bad guys showed up, you ran into the city. And that's where the trade and the business was. So farmers would grow their crops and then bring them into the city to sell them. Your government, palace, your religion, the temple, and anything else that was important was located in the center of the city. If somebody attacked, they're going to have to get through the walls and through all the people before they get to the important buildings. Common sense, that is normally how, when wars happen, we do that. Our leaders of the war are as far back as possible. Often these city-states went to war with one another over resources and political borders. Sometimes they fought to win glory or to gain more territory. During times of peace, city-states traded with each other. They also agreed to help each other by forming alliances to protect their common interests. So the last blank, guys, often these city-states went to war with one another over resources. What that means is, my crop failed in my city-state, we don't have enough food. Choice 1, we all die. Choice 2, we see if we can trade. Choice 3, we're going to war. And a lot of times, guys, it was just easier to go to war because if I don't have any food, I might not have enough stuff to trade or they don't want it. So before we starve to death, obviously we're going to march out and go to war with those things. If we're at peace, we trade with one another. And then, guys, the last thing they hinted at here is this: alliances. Alliances would say, here come the bad guys from here, they're coming to destroy us. Pick off city 1, pick off city 2. So then these cities would say, guys, let's get together. And so they would join an alliance to fight a common enemy. We do that all the time when it comes to wars. You think about World War II. It wasn't America versus everybody. It was America, Britain, Russia, Australia, France. The list can go on. Those were all on our alliance fighting against Germany. Germany had Italy. Germany had Japan. You know, Germany got their own people on their side, and so you tried to form groups to protect yourself to get through these things. So when times were good, these city-states ran their own business and would trade with one another. When times were bad, we're going to war with each other. Most of the time, guys, it would have fought over resources. Sometimes it would be to get more land. Sometimes it was literally just for glory. I want wealth. I don't really need to conquer you, but I'm going to conquer you because I need slaves. I want your gold. I want the wood that's in short supply. And so off they went. All right, 6th grade, we're only halfway through the lesson. We'll stop there for today. We'll get ready to pick up on the next page tomorrow as we continue to talk about the Sumerians. Because we're not done, you don't have a worksheet, you'll get that one tomorrow. Blessings on your day.